Pay close attention. The news you are about to see is fulfilling Bible prophecy.
Welcome to another edition of YPN News, bringing you news as it relates to Bible prophecy and foretold by Yishra Hawkins. We're going to talk a little bit about climatic events in Europe this time. We know we've been dealing with that for a while in various places. Russian preparations and their conflict between themselves and Ukraine. And we're also going to ask the question now, what is Israel going to do now that they supposedly accomplished their objectives with Hamas and Hezbollah? That's one of the things that Anthony Blinken is wondering about. But first, we're going to start it off with what's been taking place with the torrential flooding in Spain. Spain is the latest to be swamped with what some might feel is near biblical proportions of rain. Well, take a look at this next video to see the devastation for yourself.
Vimos a un joven que estaba en el descampado y se lo llevó la corriente, que estaba encima del coche. Me han dicho gente que estaba agarrada a los árboles, pero las fuerzas les hizo soltarse y se los llevaban pidiendo auxilio.
This is the town of Paiporta, just outside of the city of Valencia, and it's one of the worst affected areas of the flooding. As you can see, people here are still wandering around in a state of shock at how such a flood could have occurred in this area. Roads have been blocked, but also they don't have any electricity, they don't have any running water, and many questions are now starting to be asked of the authorities why enough warning wasn't given.
Yo no he visto que haya venido ni la policía, ni el alcalde, ni nadie a dar la cara, a decir, oye, que esto ha sido una cosa imprevista, porque la verdad sea dicha, esto claro no se espera.
It's an incredible amount of rain there, receiving as much rain in an entire year in 8 hours. And I know the people are kind of, they're kind of complaining that the government should have had some type of earlier warning available. When you get that much rain that fast, it would have to be quite a ahead of time warning to give people time to get out of there. I mean, with so much water so fast.
And then where are they going to go? Right. To get away from it, and B, you almost wonder as well how that's going to affect their economy with a lot of the things that they produce out of there, like the olive oil and so forth.
Well, just a few miles north of Lima, Peru, President Xi Jinping will unveil a megaport called Chanqi Port. Now, China is projecting $4 billion in investments drawn by the port over the next 10 years. Now, even though the port will be in Peru, China will control 60%. Peru will benefit from more jobs from Chinese firms coming to the area. Now, the Peruvian government wants to strengthen ties with China, and this port is the first step in that direction. Now, since Peru joined the Belt and Road Initiative in 2019, about 200 companies have invested more than $30 billion in Peru.
Now, China also operates copper mines and power generation plants in the country as well. Now, some Peruvians are questioning China's intentions in their country. In fact, when President Xi Jinping landed at the capital in Lima, protesters filled the streets in opposition to his visit. Protesters complained that the Chinese-funded projects didn't hire most of the citizens there in Peru, and that these projects only benefited the two governments, that being the government of Peru and the government of China. They also expressed their frustrations over countries coming only to exploit their natural resources.
Well, China's president, along with others, will attend the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit in Lima, Peru, also called APEX. Now, many other world leaders will also be in attendance, including President Joe Biden. Now, while there, he will meet with President Xi, making this their third in-person meeting. Of course, the U.S. is keeping an eye on China's workings in South America and also warned its Peruvian ally about China's debt trap. Now, this megaport is just a little too close for comfort for the U.S. with Chinese industries and a China-controlled port pretty much right in their backyard.
And this is just for commerce, and the United States is worried about it being so close to the United States when what we see with Russia is not commerce, but warfare. Now, U.S. is kind of getting a little feel of what Russia's been feeling for many years with NATO. Well, 21 countries make up the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Group, better known as APEC, as we just mentioned. To better understand who these countries are, let's take a look at some facts. Well, they represent 60% of the world's gross domestic product, or GDP, almost half of all global trade, and just 38% of the planet's population. Now, APEC is not only made up of economic giants like the United States, Russia, and China, but some of the smallest countries like Brunei and Papua New Guinea.
Well, from the start in 1989, APEC's goal was to push economic growth through encouraging the flow of products, services, capital, and technology. Now, it has been a catalyst that turned the Asia-Pacific into the most powerful trade region in the world. But today, it is running into trouble.
Well, Jorge Saad, a former APEC representative, told Al Jazeera, today the dominant economies are worried about their own internal problems. There's disdain for multilateralism and rule of law, as we're seeing in Ukraine and Gaza. What's dominating, Mr. Saad says, is the law of the strongest instead of accords that set the rules for integration and common prosperity.
Well, millions of people living in the Asia-Pacific region could benefit from integration. Finding common grounds all 21 APEC leaders can agree on has been difficult and could be even more difficult once Donald Trump has been inaugurated as the 47th president of the United States of America. Now, President-elect Trump had vowed during his campaign that protecting America and imposing tariffs was high priority.
Well, Trump also prefers bilateral agreements between countries versus multilateral ones. As in the example of Mexico, Trump said at a rally, if they don't stop this onslaught of criminals and drugs coming into our country, I'm going to immediately impose a 25% tariff on everything they send into the United States of America. Trump also has threatened to slap China with 60% tariffs on all their imports to the United States. If there was a U.S.-China trade war, it would ripple out and affect the entire globe. While APEC as a forum might survive the changing times, many of its members might not.
Well, Russia is joining forces with North Korea as it prepares to regroup and push forward with its offensive against Ukraine. What does this mean for the conflict? Well, more on this in the next video. Take a look.
Out of the war in Ukraine, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says Russia is expanding its offensive, launching a record 145 drones in just one day. Glide bombs, in addition to drones, and a ballistic missile were also launched into Ukraine, killing at least 6 civilians, injuring about 30 more. Meanwhile, Russia is massing 50,000 troops. That includes North Korean soldiers for what looks to be a new offensive in Kursk. That's that region in Russia that has been partially occupied by Ukrainians. Ukrainian intelligence tells ABC News that this video right here, it shows North Korean soldiers in Russia.
Hi, Terry. Yeah, I mean, the latest on the battlefield is mainly very worrying signs for Ukraine. As you say, there are 50,000 Russian and North Korean troops now said to be massed in the Kursk region. Of them, it's estimated that there could be as many as 10,000 North Korean troops, all there to basically take part in a counteroffensive to try and push back Ukrainian forces that managed to seize a foothold in the Kursk region back in August. And as you know, as we understand it from what we can assess, Russia has already, over the last couple of months, been able to take back about half of what the Ukrainians had managed to seize back in August. But so far, the Ukrainians had been holding them. There's an expectation now that Russia will attempt a bigger offensive to try and remove them. But it's not just in Kursk. Also in eastern Ukraine, we're seeing Ukrainian forces under severe pressure at multiple points, in particular around the town of Kharkiv, where there is now the risk that a large number of Ukrainian troops could find themselves surrounded. There's a risk there that the lines could crumble if the Russians manage to capture that town, which would be a very serious blow to Ukrainian forces in eastern Ukraine. But just in general, we're seeing that Ukrainian troops are under severe pressure at multiple points, and we hear from them that they are suffering in particular from shortages of manpower, and that they are very, very worried about the general direction of the war at the moment, Terry.
Done interesting, 50,000 troops there that they're stationing, bringing them on Ukraine's border, and up to 10,000 of them could, are said to be North Korean soldiers. So, this is a big move now, including other country soldiers here into this war.
Yeah, two countries that on a global stage aren't looked at with the highest regard either. Well, the United States Secretary of State Anthony Blinken has called for a, quote, firm response to news that Russia has enlisted the help of North Korean troops and they are now stationed along Ukrainian borders. Mr. Blinken has discussed the situation with the new Secretary General of NATO, Mark Rutte.
Well, Mr. Blinken also met with leaders to discuss ending the war in Gaza, pointing out that Israel has met its original goals set at the beginning of the war. Take a look at this.
The U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has made comments in Brussels related to the war on Gaza. He's calling on Israel to end the war, saying it's reached the goals it's set for itself.
What we've seen is this. Israel, by the standards it set itself, has accomplished the goals that it set for itself, the strategic goals it set for itself. It was rightly determined to make sure, to the best of its ability, that October 7th could never happen again. And to do that, it said that it needed to dismantle the military organization of Hamas and to get the leadership that was responsible for October 7th. It's done both of those things. So this should be a time to end the war.
Secretary Blinken has been to the region more than 11 times, has met with the region leader, has tried to push Israel to wind down the war, and so far has been unable to. And not only that, as he engaged in diplomacy, the U.S. continued to provide diplomatic support and weapons and funding to Israel. And over the past year, especially it's an election year, the Biden administration was a lame duck administration and unable to pressure Israel. And now after the election of Donald Trump, it has moved from lame duck to dead duck, and I think they will have zero impact on the ground.
Right, and it's interesting that he's saying this today when it seems like, just 24, 48 hours ago, the U.S. was, it seemed, lifting pressure on Israel to abide by international law by saying that Israel had made good progress on allowing aid into the Gaza Strip, which, as we've heard from our correspondent, isn't the case at all.
Yeah, and as we've seen really from the ground that there's actually, the Israelis are using starvation as a tool of war in Gaza. And this is, in effect, a war crime. But in the same time, the U.S. continues to provide this diplomatic cover. But the facts on the ground speak for themselves. There are starving children, starving babies on the ground, and nobody's able to help them.
Yeah, on the international community, as well as the people in, Gaza and Lebanon and so forth, they're wondering, how much more pounding, is Israel going to put on these nations, seeing as though they've gotten the big leaders, the big players that were responsible for this onslaught or this initiation of this attack that took place on October 7th.
Right, and Israel said that they wanted to dismantle, Hamas and, of course, get the leadership responsible, like you said. And people are saying, look, you've accomplished that, but now the people in Gaza are continuing to suffer, and of course saying, they're using starvation as a weapon. We've talked about how many people are there in that region in such a small area, of course, and not letting aid in or very little aid. And now, of course, the inhabitants there, they're just the ones that are still receiving the brunt.
That's right. Sad. Well, there is a lot of concern about what Ukraine's government will do if it loses support of the United States when President-elect Donald Trump takes office in January. One looming question that many are speculating is, will Kyiv build its own nuclear weapons? Our last video explores this question in depth. Please pay close attention.
Let's talk about the Ukraine war. It's gone on for nearly 1,000 days, and Donald Trump's victory means uncertainty for Kiev. So they may be exploring some extreme options, like developing a Ukrainian nuclear weapon. So will it come down to that? We'll discuss. But first, let's look at the latest situation on the battlefield. Russia has lost some territory. It wants to seize this lost territory. It's amassing troops. It is bombarding the Ukrainian capital. Yesterday, it hit Kiev with a wave of drone and missile strikes. It was the first aerial assault on the capital since August. Meanwhile, Ukraine is struggling to hold on to its gains. It had the advantage this summer, but now its front lines are faltering. So is the political support, courtesy Donald Trump. He promised to end the Ukraine war on day one. How? He says it would require concessions, especially from the Ukrainian side. Basically, Kiev will have to give up land for peace. Of course, Zelensky does not agree, but refusing Trump will cost him American support. The U.S., after all, is the biggest supplier of military weapons to Ukraine. It's given $64 billion in military aid so far. If Kiev refuses Trump's plan, that money will stop flowing, which is why Ukraine is exploring a second option, making its own nuclear weapon. It was first mentioned in this report. It cites a briefing paper prepared by Ukraine's defense ministry. The paper looks at options. What can Kiev do if Trump pulls aid? And one of the options is to build a rudimentary nuclear bomb, something that should be ready in a matter of months. Ukraine could use plutonium for this, and the technology won't be new either. It will be similar to America's atomic bomb. In fact, here's a quote from that paper. Creating a simple atomic bomb, as the United States did within the framework of the Manhattan Project, would not be a difficult task 80 years later. So the report states a simple atomic bomb, big enough to take out a Russian military base or even some industrial targets. Now, Ukraine has denied all these reports. It says it has no such plans, either to develop or acquire nukes. That should have put the speculation to rest. But you see, this is not the first time that Ukraine has dabbled with the idea of getting nukes. This country became independent in 1991, Ukraine, when the Soviet Union disintegrated. Ukraine inherited thousands of Soviet nuclear weapons. In 1994, Ukraine gave them up. It transferred all those nukes to Russia. This was an exchange of security, and it was a deal brokered by the West. Ukraine's security guarantees are since gone, but it still has 9 operational reactors. It also has the expertise to build weapons. So it should not really be difficult. And it is something that President Zelensky has mentioned before.
What is the way out? Either Ukraine will have nuclear weapons, and then this is defense for us, or we should have some kind of an alliance. Today, we do not know any effective alliances other than NATO.
Interesting article there, Ketan, to end our news here for this evening. President Zelensky giving Trump the ultimatum, NATO or nukes, and United States has been providing aid to Ukraine this whole time. But of course, President Donald Trump, or President-elect Donald Trump, has said once he takes office, he made the brag actually, that he's going to end the war on day one. You know, and he's saying that Ukraine is going to have to compromise by giving up possibly some of the land, and of course, Ukraine doesn't want to do that. So, you know, this option now that they're saying, look, you know, you heard Mr. Zelensky say that there, that if NATO isn't going to help, basically, he said, if NATO isn't going to help us, you know, our other option is we could build a nuke.
Yeah,
you know?
well, and with that sentiment in their mind, Russia has already, as we mentioned before, you know, brought it to the table on the international scale that we understand that if these things continue to escalate, nuclear weapons are our option, and we know there will be no winners, but we're not going to take this lying down.
Yeah, it's interesting. It certainly ramps it up. Of course, President-elect Donald Trump going to be taking office here soon in a few months, and then we're going to see really where it's going to go from there.
Yeah, and the President-elect Donald Trump, when he was in office formally, he pretty much said that, you know, the United States is not going to just continue to give these things out for free.
Right.
Particularly what was being contributed to the United States Security Council, everybody not paying their dues. So, you know, he pulled out of a lot of things, and he pulled back from all these quote-unquote freebies that the U.S. was giving to a lot of its allies.
Right. Very interesting times.
That's right.
If you'd like to find out more about these stories, contact the House of Yahweh, and when you do, don't forget to request your free copy of the monthly newsletter and Prophetic Word magazine. Here's how.
To contact the House of Yahweh, you can write them at the House of Yahweh, P.O. Box 2498, Abilene, Texas 79604. You can call them at 1-800-613-9494. Visit them on their website. Visit them on the web by going to Yahweh.com, YisraelHawkins.com, or Yahweh'sBranch.com. You can also visit our website by going to YPNnews.com. You can email the House of Yahweh at info@Yahweh.com. And for all calls outside the United States, please dial the number on your screen. And don't forget the Israel Says and Ask Israel programs. You can find those online by going to YisraelSays.com and AskIsrael.com.
Well, don't go anywhere. Up next is another classic message from Yisrael Hawkins. From all of us here at YPN News, I'm Jeffrey Heimerman.
And I'm Katan Alexander.
Thanks for watching.